In the modern world, who struggles more, men or women? Of course, it depends what we mean by struggle. If by struggle you're talking about something like dating apps, then men might have women beat. But what about the all-encompassing term of loneliness? Again, you'll probably say men. We're constantly hearing about the male loneliness epidemic plaguing first world countries right now and how big of a problem it is. But what does the data actually say? This is where things get a little murkier. One study by the American Institute for Boys and Men found that men and women spend a similar amount of time alone and report similar levels of loneliness. However, if we look at young women specifically, that is, women from the 8th grade all the way to age 29, they actually report higher rates of loneliness than young men in most studies. And in another survey by The Argument, women self-reported more intense feelings of both emotional distress and social isolation across all age ranges. If that's the case, then why is this crisis of loneliness so commonly attributed to men? What deeper truth does this reveal about how we as men define friendships? And what kind of damage has this been causing to society for centuries now? Let's explore these questions. Quick disclaimer, throughout this video, I'm going to be referring to statistics and insights I first discovered in a Substack article by Derek Thompson and expanding upon those ideas. First, let's give us men a little bit more validation for our feelings of loneliness, because when it comes to making and keeping close friends, we are absolute ass at it. From 1990 to 2021, the percentage of women who said they had more than 10 close friends fell from 28% to 11%, but for men in that same time period, the percentage dropped from 40% to just 15%. And the size of these social circles do matter. There is no tangible difference in feelings of loneliness between someone who has only one close friend and someone who has no close friends. But what do we even mean when we say close friends, right? Without a definition, that seems like a pretty subjective term on the surface. Well, in this context, when we're talking about close friends, we mean people you can reach out to when facing a personal problem who aren't part of your family or household. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans reported having no close social connections, a double-digit increase from 2013. But for young men specifically, the decline was much more pronounced. More than 1 in 4 reported having no close social connections. Now at this point, you might be a little confused. Men are experiencing greater declines in friendships, and yet women have higher rates of loneliness? What exactly is going on here? In my opinion, it's a mix of a lot of different things. How men are often worse at putting a name to loneliness, how the activities we choose slightly exacerbate this, how our culture has subconsciously pushed us towards self-reporting those feelings, and the types of media men now consume. So I'm going to do my best to explain all these different facets and how they interconnect. It might seem obvious, but in order to report that you are lonely, you must recognize the fact that you are lonely. And if your daily activities don't give you the space to understand those feelings, you're probably going to think of loneliness as this temporary kind of, oh yeah, I'm sad and shit, but I'll just get over it and do something else. Writer Richard Reeves talks about the distinction between male and female contexts as face-to-face versus shoulder-to-shoulder. In short, women and children are more likely to meet face-to-face, doing things that don't require a centralizing activity, while men often require a centralizing activity as an excuse to hang out. As Derek Thompson stated, Todd Rogers, a professor at Harvard Kennedy School, did a study where he went to the American Time Use Survey, which looks at how people spend their time, whether they're eating, cooking, shopping, playing video games, and he asked men and women how likely they'd be to invite somebody to do each of these things. For women, it was most categories. Yeah, I could invite somebody to go shopping, sit and have coffee, come over while I'm cooking. But for guys, it was basically watch sports or do sports. In the Substack article, they use this to argue that this is one of the main reasons why men have such a tough time making friends, but I also think it helps explain why men, despite having fewer close friends, report lower levels of loneliness. Women spend more time in contexts where they are engaging in deep conversation and emotional disclosure. As a result, if something feels off socially, they're more likely to notice it, discuss it, and label it. Men, on the other hand, spend more time in activity-centered environments where attention is directed towards the task itself, like sports, games, projects, work, lifting, or watching a game. So when a man's social life deteriorates, he might not immediately experience that deterioration as "I am lonely." Instead, it manifests through other negative outlets like irritability, aimlessness, mood swings, excessive drinking, gaming, or, of course, fapping a lot. As Derek puts it, the problem isn't that men are lonely. The problem is that many men wouldn't recognize loneliness if it punched them in the gut and poured a beer on their head. I mean, I think loneliness itself is part of the problem, unlike what he's suggesting here, but being able to recognize loneliness when it arises would certainly help. What's to blame for this? Well, one aspect that affects both men and women is how incredibly easy it is to numb our feelings just to the point where it feels like we have satisfied our need for connection. This is a topic that's been heavily discussed on the internet by now, and it goes by different names depending on who is talking, but the most commonly known one is friction. In the past, social friction dominated our lives. If you wanted to have a social experience with friends, it required you to walk, get on your bike, or get in a car, go to a physical meeting place, and talk with people face to face. Now it is much easier to simulate that experience by DoorDashing an order, hopping on Discord, and playing video games or doing something similar. Now, I'm not saying this is always a bad thing. The internet has given us a much greater opportunity to connect with others around the world, and has provided some people who might otherwise always have had a hard time making friends in real life, whether due to a disability or some form of illness, a way of replicating a similar sort of connection. But for a lot of able-bodied people, it's used as a suppression tool, one that convinces the mind that it's receiving social connection for just long enough to create the illusion of satiety, like a bag of potato chips that leaves you full, yet nutritionally deficient. And in order for someone to realize they actually crave social connection, not just when they lay their head on the pillow at night, it would require them to sit with the feelings of loneliness rather than escape into these frictionless activities. But of course, technology isn't the whole story. The internet may be making it easier to ignore loneliness, but it doesn't explain why men are now less likely to rely on their friends in the first place. Because even when men recognize something is wrong, fewer of us seem willing to lean on each other for support. In 1990, nearly half of young men reported that when facing a personal problem, they would reach out to their friends. Today, only 22% do. This question of what happens when people lose the relationships that once gave their life meaning is something that I've actually been thinking about over the past year as I've been writing my debut novel. Echoes Across Infinity is a story about a 21-year-old named Elliot who lives in the modern world, our post-pandemic world, who through an unexplainable accident loses his mother. Through the trauma he endures, he begins to have uncontrollable visions which he soon discovers are glimpses into a parallel reality he can learn to access. Throughout the book, Elliot learns how to express and identify his emotions so he can strengthen his relationships with both the men and women in his life. It's a blend of sci-fi, philosophy, and psychology, and if you can relate to my videos, I think that reading this, temporarily living through the life of Elliot, will teach you a lot about how to handle your own struggles in the modern world. If the themes of loneliness, grief, identity, and human connection resonate with you, you can find Echoes Across Infinity by going to the first link in the description. So where did this idea that men should keep their emotional distance from each other and avoid vulnerability whenever possible come from? Well, this is going to stun a lot of you guys who have gotten most of your ideas about masculinity from internet red pill bros, but the whole concept of traditional masculinity is actually quite new in the entire timeline of humanity. And please hold your "that's gay" comments for this section, because I'll soon tell you why you even think these acts of friendship are gay. According to historians, many Enlightenment-era thinkers did not automatically assume women were more emotional than men, and gender roles were not established in the way they later became in the 19th and 20th centuries. In fact, when talking about their friends, men would often speak as if they were in love with them. An article in The Atlantic titled "How the Passionate Male Friendship Died" describes a monument between two men that could easily be mistaken for a memorial to a married couple. Draped in marble flowers and guarded by fat cherubs, it features two stone portraits joined by a knotted cloth and an inscription describing an intimate bond, a beautiful and unbroken marriage of souls and a companionship undivided during 36 complete years. They who while living had mingled their interests, fortunes, counsels, nay, rather souls, reads their tombstone, might in the same manner, in death, at last mingle their sacred ashes. In his book, The Overflowing of Friendship, Richard Godbeer tells a similar tale, one in which two Virginians first became acquainted in 1790 as eager young lawyers, eventually laying the foundation for a friendship that lasted a lifetime. When Dabney penned for him a rhapsody on life and love and friendship, William wrote in response, "How grateful are such effusions, how grateful to my mind and to my heart. They make me proud of your friendship. Ah, my dear Dabney, it is at such moments that my soul flies out to meet yours, and as they mix and commingle, I feel myself exalted and refined." William rejoiced in the intimacy and consciousness which seemed to subsist between their hearts and understandings. His friend's letters, quote, always spread such a sweet glow through his breast, and their relationship, he declared, was among the purest and sweetest sources of happiness that he had upon this earth. French philosopher Michel de Montaigne also wrote about this ideal kind of friendship that he believed he had found in his essay on friendship. In one of the most quoted lines in the history of friendship, he writes, "If you press me to say why I loved him, I feel that it cannot be expressed except by replying, because it was him, because it was me." And you know what's even crazier? Well, maybe not that crazy when we think of those times, is that male intellectuals actually thought that women were incapable of reaching this ideal. Women's brains could not endure this clasp of a knot so lasting and so tightly drawn, as Montaigne wrote. Sounds like the exact opposite of how men and women treat each other today, right? Men bond by roasting and bullying each other, while women support each other and are compassionate to show their love for each other. This didn't happen by chance. Starting in the 19th century, one of the biggest cultural changes was the rise of the idea that men and women occupied different social roles. As a result of creeping industrialization, women were portrayed as the angel of the house. In fact, this term was solidified as a Victorian ideal through the now famous poem The Angel in the House by Coventry Patmore in 1854. As an excerpt of the poem reads, "Man must be pleased, but him to please is woman's pleasure. Down the gulf of his condoled necessities, she casts her best, she flings herself." From that point onward, the feminine ideal was one of tenderness, nurturing, submissiveness, and emotional sensitivity. Conversely, men were now painted as rational, competitive, stoic creatures. In a review of Anthony Rotundo's book American Manhood, Kirkus Reviews states, "America," he says, "was transformed into a place where a man was an individual who created his own place and status. The qualities valued in a man were likewise transformed from an ideal that called for the suppression of aggressive competitive urges to an image of manliness that valued little else." And one of the factors that reinforced this trend, which I said I was going to go over, was the emerging concept of homosexuality and the rise of gay culture. As the Kirkus Review states, the 18th century lacked a true concept of homosexuality, allowing adult male friends to spend the night in each other's arms, an act inconceivable to most contemporary heterosexuals. Of course, men being sexually attracted to other men and women being sexually attracted to other women existed, but nobody thought of it in the abrasive, culture-ruining, epidemic-like way that many homophobic people tend to paint it today. Sociologist Eric Anderson calls the fear of being perceived as gay homohysteria. One of the biggest turning points for homohysteria came in 1948, when a study revealed that 10% of the population was homosexual, far more than people assumed at the time. And although that finding has never been replicated by other researchers and other studies have found a much lower percentage, the figure has taken on a life of its own. As a result, there were only more reasons for men to keep their emotional and physical distance from one another so as to not get some gay allegations thrown their way. As Rina Cohen writes in her Time article on this issue, it only makes sense for men to adjust their behavior if homosexuality is not only stigmatized, but also believed to be prevalent. Then there's grounds to worry that other people might think they're gay, and that such a label could carry consequences. The final nail in the coffin for male friendships has been modern forms of media. I could have a field day going in on these masculinity influencers that preach that men are becoming too feminine and that they need to get back to their roots of stoicism and strength, roots that are, by the way, only about 200 years old. But I'd rather put our attention on the older forms of media that depict male friendship to show you just how different it actually was. In the Iliad, an ancient Greek poem by Homer from over 2,700 years ago, the ideal warrior openly mourns his closest friend. When Patroclus is killed, Achilles' reaction is far beyond what modern readers typically expect from a male friendship. He collapses in grief, weeps openly, refuses food, embraces Patroclus' body, and becomes consumed by mourning and vengeance. At one point, he even says, "I have lost the man I loved beyond all other comrades." Far from seeing this devotion as unmanly, Homer presents Achilles' love for Patroclus as one of the defining features of his character. And perhaps my favorite depiction of male friendships comes from one of, if not the best book trilogy of all time, which is the Lord of the Rings series. I mean, these books are just chock full of healthy depictions of male friendship. In the first chapter of The Two Towers, Aragorn takes Boromir's hand and kisses his brow after Boromir opens up to him about being a failure. In the chapter Of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit, as Sam watches Frodo sleep, Tolkien writes, Sam had noticed that at times a light seemed to be shining faintly within, but now the light was even clearer and stronger. He shook his head as if finding the right words useless and murmured, I love him. He's like that, and sometimes it shines through somehow, but I love him whether or no. And at the climax of the story, when all hope seems lost, Sam carries Frodo up Mount Doom, declaring, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. Tolkien's men are courageous, competent, and resilient, but they're also tender, affectionate, and emotionally expressive. The story never treats these qualities as contradictory, and that is why I believe these books, along with the films, are some of the greatest depictions of healthy masculinity and friendship ever created. So this is what has driven male friendships into murky waters, a combination of recent gender norms reinforced by our cultural and economic systems, coupled with a lack of genuinely good examples of male friendship in modern media. Of course, these aren't the only forces at work. The decline of third places has made maintaining friendships harder for everyone. But for men specifically, these cultural shifts around masculinity have made these problems even worse. And the result is men suppressing their emotions both for themselves and for each other, treating one another coldly and often harshly, and never truly understanding what they feel because it is far too easy to avoid recognizing those emotions in the first place. Look, I'm not here to say that the occasional chirp, the occasional roast, or some funny comment to your guy friend isn't okay, but goddamn man, we are so far removed from what male friendships used to be that we're not receiving the same sort of benefits from friendship anymore. There is almost nothing as powerful for the fortification of our mental and physical well-being as genuine social connection. In one meta-analysis of over 300,000 people, researchers found that individuals with stronger social relationships had a 50% greater likelihood of survival than those with weaker ones. Another review found that social isolation and loneliness carry mortality risks comparable to many of the health factors we obsess over today. And perhaps most famously, the Harvard study of adult development, which has tracked people for nearly 90 years, found that one of the strongest predictors of a long, healthy, and happy life wasn't wealth, status, or career success, it was the quality of your relationships. So no, the problem with modern culture isn't men becoming weaker or less masculine, it's our harmful definitions for what men should do, and more specifically, how we should act towards one another. I do not give a shit if you think it's gay. Tell your homies you love them. You don't have to go this far, but be someone others can rely on. Don't abandon yourself just to people please others, but pick up your homies when they're feeling down. Show them that you're a guy that they can open up to about personal problems when they need to without feeling judged, and be that guy that others can lean on. Men knew that close platonic relationships greatly enhanced the quality of their lives, and they weren't afraid to show their more emotional sides so that they could develop truly lasting relationships. We have abandoned that, which has resulted in what I can only imagine is a significant aspect of why male rates have increased so rapidly over the past decade. You watching this video are probably going to have to become the one in your friend circle who influences your friends to become comfortable with this kind of vulnerability. And some of them might say you're a bitch and call you names. That's fine. Those are probably the people who have the deepest issues in private, and you might need to distance yourself from those kinds of people for a little bit. So you can focus on the people who genuinely want the best for you, who want to see you succeed, and who aren't obsessed with competing against you and trying to be better than you. The men who want the kinds of relationships that men had for the majority of history exist in abundance, and the more you embody these traits, the easier it will be to find men already moving in that direction who you can influence to become more well-rounded men in their platonic relationships. If you want to read a story set in the modern world that depicts the male condition and how to move through it, you should definitely check out my debut novel, Echoes Across Infinity. Whether you're an avid sci-fi reader or someone looking to get into fiction, I think this is the perfect book for you. You can go to the first link in my description to find it. And thank you so much for watching till the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this in the comments. And if you're looking for a video similar to this that I've made, you can watch Why Gen Z is Terrified of Intimacy. It touches upon the similar themes of this video, but for both genders. If you want to check that out, yeah, you can tap on it right now, and I'm leaving. Goodbye.